You are listening to the Drink Less Lifestyle podcast with Dr. Sherry Price, episode number 156.
Welcome to Drink Less Lifestyle, a podcast for successful women who want to change their relationship with alcohol. If you want to drink less, feel healthier, and start loving life again, you're in the right place. Please remember that the information in this podcast does not constitute medical advice. Now, here's your host, Dr. Sherry Price.
Well, hello, my beautiful friend. Thanks for tuning into the podcast today. So I want to share that I just listened to an excellent podcast. So the podcast is by Dr. Andrew Huberman, and you may know him. He's pretty famous for his podcast called the Huberman Labs podcast. And he recently interviewed Dr. Paul Conti, who is a psychiatrist who's trained at Stanford School of Medicine, completed his residency at Harvard before founding his current clinical practice. So in this podcast episode, Dr. Paul Conti talks about how to understand and access your mental health. Now, it's part one of a 4-part series, but I found it so digestible, so understandable, and so relatable to all the principles that you learn here in this podcast. So if you like how I teach mental health in this podcast, I think you will really benefit from listening to that podcast. And I like how he defines mental health in terms of actionable terms, because I think a lot of us think mental health is like theoretical, lots of theory. I think when we see therapists, that's sometimes the avenue that they could come at it as, but he really talks about fundamental elements. And I love how he talks about the concept of self. I love that concept so much that I actually think I want to do a whole podcast on the concept of self. But he also talks about the unconscious mind and the conscious mind, which does give rise to all of our thoughts, all of our behaviors, and all of our emotions, right? So it's that think, feel, act cycle. And in this episode, he also explores and addresses how to get to the root causes of things, right? How to get to root cause of anxiety or low confidence or negative internal narratives, overthinking, like all of these courses that I've put inside of Epic U. And I'm delighted to hear how he's expanded upon these topics. I found the podcast to be very beneficial, and I really enjoyed listening to his framework, and he describes things in such a way that is understandable. And so the goal of this podcast is not to dissect all of that was talked about in that podcast, but I find it fascinating that the subconscious mind is always active and informing the conscious mind. And that's why I am so passionate about this work, because in Epic U, on this podcast, I am teaching you how to reprogram that subconscious mind so that your conscious mind no longer has unawareness of what it's doing. It no longer has a powerfulness over you, and that you are able to step into your agency and you are empowered to reprogram your mind for different desires, different actions, and different emotions. And while the think, feel, act cycle is something I talk about in the podcast, there are many more tools that I use inside of Epic U so that you can change your subconscious programming, so that you can change your concept of self, and that you can change your relationship to yourself, which ultimately changes your relationship to other things like alcohol, like overeating, like all the other things that we do that we don't want to be doing. And as I think about it, I realize in working with many people that they don't have a good understanding of their concept of self. They are so influenced by their environment. They are so influenced by the thoughts that their parents have passed on to them, or teachers, or their social circles. They are so influenced by others. And a lot of people are living solely for the purpose of pleasing others, which is not the definition of the concept of self. We are not put on this earth to solely live for the approval of others. And so I think identifying that concept of self has a lot of merit and value. And it's also the starting point when you're doing values-driven work. So I'll put that in the back burner of my hopper of topics to discuss on the podcast, and I just may come back to that concept of self. I always enjoy listening and hearing to the comments that I get on DMs or in my Facebook groups, or even from my current Epic U members, which give me great ideas for, hey, can you talk about this in a podcast? Or, hey, this would be a great topic for the podcast. But for today's podcast, I want to talk about justifying your drink. And if you're listening to this podcast and you've gotten to a great place with your drinking, but something else is bothering you, just put in that something else. Why you justify whatever other thing that you're doing that you don't want to be doing. So you could call that a self-sabotaging behavior. You can call that an overing of some sort in your life, justifying overeating, justifying the sweets in your life, justifying the sugar in your life, justifying the alcohol in your life, justifying tolerating people that you're done tolerating in your life, right? So I really want to look at why we justify things and how to break that pattern. And one of the things I just mentioned was tolerating other people. And I will just leave it at that because I think a lot of women that I'm seeing right now are tolerating people in their lives that they're just really irritated at and they don't want to be tolerating them. Whether that other person is just mistreating you by not respecting you, treating you poorly, ignoring you, not taking you seriously, not taking your demands or your wants and your needs seriously, or things are just blown off, or tasks that you ask for aren't done. Now, of course, I'm referring to tolerating adults. We can't kick kids out of our house. At least we may not want to. We may want to secretly, but tolerating kids is different. I'm talking about tolerating adults. This could be in-laws. This could be people you live with. This could be friend relationships. This could be coworker relationships, but tolerating behavior from others that you don't want to tolerate. But yet you justify it. You justify it in some way. And here's what I want to show you about justifying something that you are doing that you don't really want to be doing and how that can harm you. So when I'm using the term justifying, I'm meaning that you're taking an action that ultimately you logically know doesn't serve you. It's really not the action you want to be taking, but you're taking it and you're justifying it. Meaning you're giving good reason to why you're doing it. At least that's what your brain is telling you, that this is a good reason why you're doing this action. It's really not the action that best serves you. So it could be justifying that second drink or that third drink, right? You know deep down that taking that action of drinking that third drink is not going to serve you, but you're justifying it anyway, right? Oh, everybody else is having one, so I'll just continue joining in. Right? So that's what I mean by justification. And here's why justifying things that we know don't serve us, and I can even go as far as to say harm us, is bad, is because anytime we justify an action that we actually don't want to be taking, it's leading to demoralization. We feel demoralized. We feel anger. We feel resentment. We feel disappointment. We feel disheartened. Like, man, I knew I should have stopped at that second drink, but why did I go for the third? Or, man, I should have said something to that colleague, but I didn't. Why didn't I do that? And this is why justifying is so negative and so horrible, because we feel the effects of that emotionally. And I know a lot of women that go on to tolerate unacceptable behavior from others, and they keep justifying it. They keep saying that I'm doing this because of this good part. I don't want to be confrontational. I'm afraid of how he'll react. I'm keeping the family together. All of these justifications, which goes on to elicit more difficult emotions within, more challenging emotions, more depressing emotions within. And then you're also allowing the other person to continue behaving the way they're behaving, which only goes to train them to say, oh, I may say this is not tolerable, but since I allow it to happen, it actually is tolerable. So you're not being a woman of your word, particularly if you let it keep happening over and over, which is just going to perpetuate this cycle even more. And as I'll talk about near the end of this podcast, that cycle becomes the pattern. It's the pattern of the relationship. Whether that is your relationship with somebody else, whether that's your relationship with alcohol, whether that's your relationship with food or spending or overworking or overthinking, that becomes the pattern that you set. And when you get disappointed or disheartened or feel demoralized in one area of your life, oftentimes you may go to a different area of your life to look for compensation from that, to feel better from that, right? So we can turn to a pint of ice cream or a gallon of ice cream at night because that's going to help me feel emotionally better because I'm feeling demoralized over here. Or I'm going to turn to a bottle of wine or some whiskey or some gin and tonics, whatever it is, because I'm not getting what I want and I feel dejected over here. So this is one way I help myself feel better. But the thing of that is we know that that feeling is temporary. It won't last. And it certainly doesn't change what's causing you to binge on ice cream or binge on alcohol. Because once the effects of that ice cream or that alcohol wears off, we are back to square one. We are back right in the same pattern in the same cycle. And ultimately, again, justifying that behavior of the ice cream, justifying that behavior of drinking leads to feeling more demoralized, more hopeless, more helpless, and then you feel that there's no other way to cope. And this is a very hard place to live from. I see women drive themselves into these circles and into these patterns, and then they ultimately feel stuck. And yes, I want to agree with you. If you get to this place or have been in this place, you know this is a very difficult place to live from. You are in survival mode. You can't calm down. You're constantly on edge. You're walking around feeling like you're walking on eggshells or pins and needles, and you are not thriving. You are just surviving. And then you justify it even more by saying, oh, I just need to get through the motions of the day. I just need to get through the day. And you don't have much gratitude. You don't have much joy. You don't have hope. And it's like you're just biding time. Now, what I want to tell you is that I've seen plenty of people live like this for years and think that this is as good as it gets. They almost think that this way of living is normal, that there's nothing wrong with it. And they don't see it as dysfunctional at all. And on top of that, they go on to justify how not dysfunctional it is. They start telling themselves things that they think may make them feel better, but it never makes them feel better. So they start justifying it like saying, well, at least I'm married and I have an intact family and the kids aren't going to suffer through a divorce. When in fact, you don't have an intact family. There is no love. The kids don't see the love. The kids don't experience the love because the love is not there. It's missing. So therefore, that is a broken family, despite not having a divorce. You could be married and still have a broken family. And going through a divorce does not mean your family is broken. I've seen plenty of women go through divorces where their family is more loving and thriving, including the kids on the other side. It's how you navigate those waters and how you set your kids up for success and how you set up that relationship going forward. But what a lot of times women will just catastrophize and say, it's going to all go to hell. My career, my job, everything. I won't have a house over my head. How will we share the kids? Where will the kids go? And it's all bad. So they justify keeping the relationship going when there is really no relationship, at least not a good one. Or I'll hear other women say, well, at least I have a roof over my head and I'm not homeless. Or I should be thankful that I have a job and these other parts of my life are going so well, just not this drinking thing or this overeating thing. True, you still have a roof over your head, and true, you are not homeless. But I don't think that's the standard you want to set for your life. What mother tells their child, oh, just go out, make sure you have a roof over your head and you're not homeless and you'll be good in life. You'll be happy. That'll be a joyful life. That's not the standard we set for our kids. That's certainly not the standard we set for ourselves. So when we use that justification and we think that that should make us feel better and it doesn't, of course not, because that's such a low standard. That's not even aspirational. So if you don't give yourself something aspirational to live for and you're not feeling inspired, well, that's why you're telling your brain you get the bare minimum. And you should be thankful for the bare minimum. And notice you're not thankful. You're not joyous. And that justification is actually making you feel worse. So I want you to start seeing the pattern of justifying. I want you to see how justifying our brain wants to tell us is going to make us feel better, but it never does. So when you tell yourself, oh, and you justify something, right? And you keep providing reasoning why you're doing something that you want to think is the right thing, but it's really not the right thing. Your body knows, inside your heart knows it's not the right thing. If you're listening to this podcast, most likely you're not at peace with your drinking, or you're not at peace with your eating, or you're not at peace with something. And continuing to justify why you keep doing it is going to have you feeling more demoralized, more disheartened, more hopeless, more helpless, and you're going to develop poor sense of coping, meaning you're going to keep going back to the alcohol or the food for feeling better. So I gave a whole bunch of examples of the behaviors that we do when we're justifying. Now I want to turn the focus and the flashlight onto what justifications are you using? So let's look at the justifications that come out of your mouth or out of your brain that have you over drinking, or that have you overeating, or that has you over yelling at your children, or that has you feeling so angry or so hopeless or so demoralized that you keep doing this thing. What are the justifications you're using? When it comes to drinking, common ones I hear is, oh, my drinking's not that bad. There are other people that, drink way worse than I do. How does that make you feel? Does that make you feel better about your drinking? Does that make you want to change your drinking? My guess is not, if you're justifying it. But when you say that justification, first of all, we know it's not true because we have data and we have numbers and we have quantification. And the literature tells us that a heavy drinker for a woman is someone who drinks more than 7 drinks a week. So if you have 4 on a Friday and 4 on a Saturday, you're over drinking. That's a heavy drinker because that's more than 7 in 1 week. And we know that heavy drinking has been proven to have over 39 negative consequences. So those are the facts. So if you have a problem with heavy drinking, telling yourself, my drinking isn't that bad, is a lie. And it means you're trying to justify your behavior. Now, this is not about feeling good or feeling bad or any of that. It's about really just looking at what's coming out of your brain. Because what's coming out of your brain is informing your body on how to act. So if the thought coming out of the brain is, well, my drinking's not that bad, then it's informing the body, okay, keep doing it. All is well. And then you go and do the action of having more drinks. Because it all starts in the mind. And this is why we have to look at the mind so closely. Or you might say, 39 negative consequences. I'm not experiencing any negative consequences from my drinking. And my follow-up to that is always, well, is that true? Because I hardly find that is true. When we really pop the hood and look under the hood of the car, right, we'll find that there are some negative consequences. We're just not looking at them. Or another justification I hear a lot is, going through a really hard time right now. Or I had a really hard day or a really long day. So let's go back to, I'm having a hard time right now. Okay, so if you're choosing alcohol as a way to cope during this hard time, I just want to ask, do you have a timeline of when that's going to end? And if you don't, you need to set one. Set a deadline, a hard deadline, right? It's okay, I'm just going to allow myself to wallow during this time, use some alcohol to numb, and then set a deadline. Now, when you have a hard deadline, most people think that that's the work, just setting the deadline. It's not. The harder work comes next. The harder work is the plan. Okay, so when that date comes, what are we going to do? What is on the other side of that deadline and how you're going to cope, how you're going to get through this? What tools are you going to use? Do you need a therapist? Do you need a coach to help you through? Because it's going to be hard and it's going to be challenging. Because when you take away a substance that makes you feel good, what are you left with? So you have to find other ways, not just to cope, because nobody wants to stay in coping forever, right? The goal is not to need coping mechanisms. The goal is to reprogram your mind so you don't need coping mechanisms. Now, if you need them temporarily because life gets out of control, great. There are plenty of coping mechanisms I can teach you that don't involve alcohol or food. Some of them I am using right now. I am on a very intense detox for my gut. There are very few foods that I can have right now. And I realized how much I would use food to soothe myself. So I'm relying on other coping mechanisms. Now, I won't need these mechanisms once I get through phase 1 and I get into phase 2 and into phase 3, because I will be allowing the foods that I really miss back into my diet, because I'm even having to cut out some healthy foods right now. But I'm so glad I have these coping tools that I can rely on, so I'm not wallowing in depression during phase 1 of this detox. So it's not just setting a deadline, but getting a plan in place. And then how are you going to execute the plan? And what part of that plan needs to be executed now? Like if the deadline is like on the first of the month, we don't start looking for a therapist or a coach on the first of the month, right? We want that set up ahead of time because we want to set up for success, not set up for failure. Another justification I hear a lot is, this is my only vice. I don't do marijuana. I don't do other drugs. This is my only vice. And okay. Again, my favorite question, is that true? Because for most women, I find that they tell themselves that this is their only vice, but that there are other vices that they do. And it may not be drugs, but it could be other things that they over on. They may overshop. They may overspend. They may do a lot of over negative thinking, or just overthinking that most of it isn't positive, or ruminating, or causing themselves more worry. And as I point out in my overthinking course inside of Epic You, is that thinking is healthy. Our brain is designed to think and to solve for problems, right? So thinking, to plan, to take action, to make a plan, to carry out the plan, to execute the plan, all very healthy. That is the function of the brain. But overthinking, like over-planning, over-ruminating, spinning out, and not taking action on your plan, well, that isn't healthy. That could become the point where thinking just to think, and just staying in our heads without actually taking action, that's the part that needs to change. Because the brain loves to solve problems. It's not a problem to solve a problem, but it becomes a problem if we know there's a problem and we keep thinking about the problem, but we're not taking any action to solve the problem. And then we're just wallowing in the problem and we stay stuck, and we keep justifying why we stay stuck. And there's a whole host of reasons we give for justifying. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't know who can help me. Like all of the things which are just not true. There's plenty of time. There's ways to get money. And there are plenty of people out there that can help. And some people offer free help. So what justifications do you use? It's really helpful to know. I know for me, I would use this justification. If you had my child, you would drink too. That was a justification I used for a long time. If you had to deal with my child, you would drink too. I mean, what kind of cop-out was that? I see it now as the biggest cop-out ever. So other justifications can look like, I'll figure it out sometime. Now's not the right time. I hear a lot of times, I'm going on vacation. Now's not the right time, right? I hear a lot, now's not the right time. It's like a pregnancy, right? And now's not the right time. Now's not the right time. You can keep saying that, but months go by, years go by, your life goes by. When is the right time? And it's similar to a pregnancy. There is no right time. It's not like there's one perfect time where everything will be in alignment and there will be no challenges, no obstacles in the way, and it'll just be easy. Our brain likes to think that that magical time exists, but it does not. Or sometimes I'll hear, when I figure out so-and-so, then I'll stop. When I figure out this portion, then I'll stop drinking. Or there's the person that feels so overwhelmed by all the problems they have. And they want to tackle all these problems, but they'll just pinpoint one problem and then tackle everything onto that. Like, if I was only 20 pounds lighter, then I'd care and I'd actually do something about it. But why care? Why care? Because it's your life. Because it's your health. Because it's affecting everything from your mental state to your emotional state to how you feel about yourself, your concept of self, your self-image, your self-esteem, how you come across to other people, how loving you are of a person. How can you be a loving person if deep down you hate yourself? I'm not saying you can't be a loving person. I'm just saying it's much harder to be a loving person if who you're walking around in this vessel doesn't feel a lot of love for themselves. It's hard to generate something that you don't currently have. And I want to be crystal clear here. As an adult, you can continue to do whatever you want. You have that total freedom of choice. What a privilege. But what I want to show you is that these justifications lead to patterns because we all operate in patterns in our life. We have patterns for everything that we do because it is the way that the brain helps to simplify all the information so that we can move through this world efficiently and effectively. So if we all operate in patterns, isn't it helpful to know what your patterns are and which ones are great and don't need to be changed and which ones are not so great and therefore might want to be changed? And I think that's the value in doing this work, is because it allows us to see problems so that we can solve them. Now, there are plenty of patterns that we have that don't need to be changed. I love when I talk to my next door neighbor. He's so funny. Every time we're talking, and then when we walk away from the conversation, he always waves and says, "Have a good day." That's his pattern. When I hear him talking to the other neighbor across the street, he'll do the same thing. They'll have a conversation, then I hear him walk away, and he's waving his hand saying, "Have a good day." It's never "have a great day," "have a nice day." It's always "have a good day." That's his pattern. That's how he closes conversation and walks away. You may notice my pattern. Every time I start the podcast now, I start with, "Hello, my beautiful friend." It's my pattern and it's intentional. I didn't always do that from the beginning of my podcast. Then I wanted to be intentional about my opening. I wanted to say something at the beginning of the podcast to you, the listener, where you feel welcomed and you feel honored and you feel like, wow, somebody just lifted me up today and called me beautiful. I wanted to deliver you a compliment because I know when you're over drinking, it can feel so alone and you can feel so misunderstood and you can oftentimes not feel in a beautiful place. And so I wanted it to be personal. So I reach out to you and you feel connected to me and I feel connected to you. And then I generally have a pattern at the end of the podcast where I'm inviting you to be your epic self, to do life a little bit better, to solve a problem that's really bothering you. Because when you feel better, when you feel more amazing, when you feel more epic, I will tell you, you're more kind, you're happier, you go out and do more good in the world. You shine with more love. And that's very magical. And that's what our world needs. And I want you also to know that that is available to you anytime you choose. You have agency over your life. I want you to see that. You have agency over your problems. I want you to know that. And I also want you to know that there are plenty of tools that you can practice to get there if you're not there yet. Because this is inner work. When you have the inner work, and you work on the inner work, you don't need the externals so much. You don't need the food, the shopping, the clothes, the alcohol, the handbags, all of that for your happiness. Yes, you can still choose those in a way that fits your budget, in a way that fits your health, in a way that fits your parameters and your life the way you want it to, but you're not dependent on it. And that inner work comes from reprogramming your mind. And that's the work we do in Epic You. You learn more tools than what's just taught in this podcast. You learn how to do this for yourself. Yes, you will need my help. Yes, you will need my guidance. And yes, I am there for you to give all of that to you so that you can learn these tools and so that you can fly on your own. And that's why my membership is set up to be month by month. Some people need a little support. Some people need a lot of support. You can come and go as you please. You could come, grab all the tools in 1 month and leave. Or if you need to be supported longer, you can stay. And I even share the tools I'm using in my life to help me live my epic life as I'm defining it in this phase of my life, right? For September, the ladies know I shared with them my epic goal, my epic tactics to get there, how I'm tracking, what I'm measuring, why it's important to me. And just by me sharing that, a lot of light bulbs went off for other people. They're like, oh, I want that same goal, but I was choosing this way to get there and that wasn't working. Or I was choosing these metrics to get there and these actions and that's not going to help me. That's not actually what I want. I actually want that. So we get to learn and grow from one another. And of course, there's private coaching too for those sensitive topics that I get that people don't want other people a part of, and they want that intimate conversation with me. And so there's an opportunity to get private coaching as well. Because here's what I know. It is critical to know your patterns. It is critical to understand how your brain is currently set up and operating. And if it's not operating in a way you want, how to move into ways to change that that's sustainable, meaning you don't revert back. Or the times that you revert back are very minimal. I call that stepping into your new identity. And here's the thing, your brain runs on patterns. Most of society runs on patterns, right? We have a stoplight. That's a pattern, right? We don't sit at a stoplight for 20 minutes. We know it's going to change before then. It's going to say green and we know to go. That's a pattern. And when it's yellow, we either speed up or slow down. And then when it's red, hopefully most of us stop. So we learn these patterns on how society works. You could call them patterns, you can call them algorithms, but our brain is constantly running on them to be efficient. And so it's informing the body on what to do and how to act. So when the brain sees that yellow light, the brain is either telling your foot to step on the gas or to step on the brake. And if you're in medicine, right, you know that there's protocols and there's algorithms all over the place. When I was in the ICU, there's a protocol for codes, right? Patient codes, you've identified the rhythm. If it's asystole, we know don't shock that rhythm. You give epinephrine, right? So there's algorithms to follow. Why? Because this is a life or death situation and time is of the essence and we can't waste time looking up on textbooks or asking Dr. Google what to do. No, we need a protocol. Everybody needs to know the protocol so everybody gets into position and the patient life could be saved. We have protocols on how to treat a heart attack. We have protocols on how to handle acute congestive heart failure. We have patterns. All these are patterns. They inform the brain what to do and how to act, right? Social media and the internet. Have you noticed their algorithms? You click on an item and all of a sudden you get ads for that item if you didn't purchase it. You're getting that ad for days later. They know what you're interested in. They know what you clicked on. It's in the algorithm. They won't leave you alone. Everything works on patterns, especially your brain. And my superpower is that I can identify your pattern and tell you how your brain is thinking and what to do to break it. That's my superpower. And so I want you to look at your justifications because your justifications are part of a pattern. And what most people don't do is they don't look at their justifications. They blow them off and they just say, well, yeah, I know I shouldn't, but, right? That's not looking at the justification. I know I shouldn't say this to myself, but, and I say, let's reverse the tape. Nope, let's stop. Let's look at exactly what happened and what justification your brain was telling you. Because ultimately, you want to know why you're not taking the action you really want to be taking. If you really want to drink less and you're not doing it, let's find out why. Because if you keep justifying it, it's going to keep leading you to feel demoralized, disheartened, hopeless, helpless, and keep you stuck. So the whole goal of looking at these justifications your brain comes up with is to understand the pattern so you can prevent the demoralization that they cause. So you can ultimately change and reprogram your mind to get rid of these justifications. That's rewiring your brain. So the justifications dissolve. So there's a different pattern now in your brain, a different neural network, a different algorithm that your brain runs on. That's rewiring of the brain, my friend. And the benefit of rewiring your brain is that you'll experience freedom, contentment, and joy. This is beautiful stuff here. I hope you have the courage to dig into your justifications and do this work. This is the work we do in Epic You. We barely talk about alcohol. Women are always surprised when they come in. They think that all the Slack messages are going to be about alcohol. They are not about alcohol because we are solving for what's causing the drinking. We are solving the root issue, the root cause. And until you can address that root cause, you won't make sustainable progress. So look at your justifications. Make your list. how are they holding you back from being your most epic self? All right, my beautiful friend, thank you for joining me today. Have an epic week, and I'll see you in the next episode. If you want to change your relationship with alcohol and with yourself, then come check out Epic You. It's where you get individualized help mastering the tools so you can become a woman who can take it or leave it and be in control around alcohol in any situation. Epic You is the place for women who want to be healthy, confident, and empowered to accomplish their goals and live their best life. Come join us over at epicu.com/epicu. That's epicu.com/EPICYOU. I can't wait to see you there.